My name is Garrett, and this story took place when I was a sophomore in college. After my freshman year, I couldn't get a place in the dorms, so I had to look for housing off campus. I ended up living in a co-op community of three old houses that were close to campus, but not entirely convenient. It wasn't ideal, but it was cheap, and I didn't have many options. The residents were mostly young students like me, but there were a few exceptions, a few alumni, a few teaching assistants, and even a few older people pursuing their degrees. But the person who caught my eye right away was an older woman who lived in a nearby house. She might have been in her 50s, but she looked much older, with graying hair and a limp that suggested she'd had a back injury. She spoke very little, kept a blank expression on her face, and seemed to quietly observe everything. The first time I saw her doing anything strange was in the communal kitchen of the building. The other two houses had their own kitchens, so I had no idea why she was there. She didn't cook, she didn't eat, she didn't even talk to anyone. She just stood there, silent, while we busied ourselves preparing dinner. Every time I turned around, I caught her staring at me. At first I thought it was just an illusion, but then I started to feel that something was wrong. A week later, while I was doing homework in my room, I happened to look out the window. It was late at night, and the wind was cold. But there she was, standing in the middle of the empty street, motionless, facing my window. I didn't know if she was looking at me or pointing in the direction of the house, but a creepy feeling came over me. I waved stupidly at her, trying to be friendly, but as soon as I did, I realized my mistake. She suddenly jumped up, jumped in place a few times as if she were happy, then turned and ran straight into one of the houses. I asked my housemates about her, but no one knew much. A senior told me she had lived here for a long time, was affiliated with the university, but had no history of violence. They also told me it was best not to bother with her like everyone else here. But things got worse and worse. One night, as I stepped out of my room to get a drink, I almost bumped into her right in front of the door. She just stood there, completely silent. I jumped, took a few steps back, but instead of saying anything, she just turned and walked away into the darkness, as if I were the intruder. A few days later, I lost my room key. This was bad, because all the rooms in the building had individual locks. I was forced to get a new key, but the feeling of insecurity grew. And then, one night, I woke up in the middle of the night feeling like something was wrong. At first, I didn't know why, but then I heard a soft knocking sound coming from the closet. It would ring every 20 seconds or so. I held my breath, feeling like my whole body was frozen. The room was dark, with only a faint light from the street outside. I picked up the flashlight next to the bed and turned it on with shaking hands. The light shone directly into the closet. The noise continued, knock, knock, knock. I swallowed, slowly walking toward it, my heart pounding. My fingers tightened on the knob, and I yanked it open. There was nothing inside. I breathed a sigh of relief, telling myself it was probably just a tired hallucination. But as I turned away, I suddenly felt someone's breath on the back of my neck. My neck felt cold, every hair on my skin standing on end. I turned around, and there she was. She was standing right in front of me, staring at me with empty eyes. A slow, crooked smile spread across her wrinkled face. Then she whispered, her voice hoarse, "I know where your room is, Garrett." I don't remember what happened after that, only that the next morning I packed my things and moved out immediately. I didn't care where I lived, as long as I got out of this place. From that day on, I never returned to that cooperative housing complex again. But sometimes, when I was alone in my room at night, I could still hear the knocking sound coming from some dark corner of the house, and I knew she was still watching me. I was not a person who was easily frightened, and I was certainly not a weakling in dangerous situations. But that night, everything changed. I was sleeping when I was suddenly awakened by a strange sound coming from the wardrobe, a rattling sound, as if someone was moving inside. I frowned, trying to calm myself. Maybe it was just the wind? Or a mouse? But an uneasy feeling rose in my chest, as if there were eyes watching me from the darkness. My heart pounding, I quietly sat up, walking slowly towards the wardrobe. Each step felt heavy. The space in the room suddenly became uncomfortably quiet. I reached out, grabbed the handle of the cupboard, and took a deep breath. I couldn't hold on any longer. I yanked the cupboard door open. A figure rushed out. A woman, her disheveled hair obscuring her pale face. One of my ties was wrapped around her neck, her eyes wide, empty but wild. In her hand was a shiny kitchen knife. I screamed, reflexively stepping back. She screamed too, a horrifying sound that seemed to echo from the grave. Without thinking, I reached out to block the stab and wrestled her to the floor. She struggled, kicking, biting like a wild animal. I held her hand tightly, trying to wrest the knife from her hand. The door to the room swung open. Lee, my roommate, rushed in, quickly helping me subdue the crazy woman. She was still screaming like crazy, but we held her down while someone else called the police. When the police arrived, they immediately handcuffed her and searched her. What terrified me most was not the woman, but what they found in her pocket, my room key. A few weeks later, the police confirmed her identity. She was the sister of the building's property manager. Because of his severe mental problems, instead of taking her to treatment, he hid her in one of the empty rooms in the building. No one knew how long she had been there, nor how she got my room key. The police arrested the manager for neglect and other violations. Even though it was over, I still can't forget that moment. Her wide eyes, the wildness in her movements, and the fear that, if I hadn't woken up in time, I might not be alive to tell this story. I've lived in a modest 2-story house with my husband, Benjamin, for over 20 years. All of our children have grown up and left to make their own lives. I couldn't be prouder. But what I'm about to tell you happened last year, an event that still haunts me to this day. It was late afternoon, the sky tinged with orange. I was tending my small garden when I heard a strange noise from the house across the street. It was an argument, a woman's voice shouting, hoarse with anger, and the voice of Quinn, our new neighbor, trying to calm her down. I looked up, seeing their silhouettes through the window blinds. The blonde girl I often saw coming to Quinn's house rushed out the door, her face contorted with rage. She shouted something I couldn't make out before getting into her car and driving away, the tires screeching on the pavement. I went back to my work, thinking it was just one of those usual arguments between young couples. But then, that night, I woke up to a strange sound. A knock on the door. Not my door, but Quinn's. The knock was slow and steady, as if someone was in no hurry, but very patient. I looked out the bedroom window and saw a dark figure standing in front of Quinn's door. The darkness hid the person's face, but something was wrong. Quinn didn't open the door. After a long moment, the dark figure moved. I couldn't see where it went, but a shiver ran down my spine. The next morning, I found Quinn's door still closed. There was no sign of him. I tried to brush it off, thinking he was just sleeping late. But then, the next night, something strange happened again. I woke up in the middle of the night to a noise. This time, it was the sound of something being dragged across the wooden floor. I opened the window and tried to look over at Quinn's house. The lights in his house were flickering erratically. My heart pounded as I saw a figure pass by the living room window, but the light was too dim for me to make out who it was. The next morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I told Benjamin that something was wrong at Quinn's house, but he brushed it off, saying I was imagining things. Maybe he's having a late-night party, Benjamin said, but I didn't believe him. The third night, I decided to keep an eye out. I sat by the window, waiting. Near midnight, a shadow appeared again, but this time, it wasn't standing outside the door. It was inside Quinn's house. I saw it move, a tall, thin figure, walking slowly, but there was something off about it, like it wasn't quite human. I held my breath as it stood in front of the window, facing out, and then I saw it. A face. But it wasn't a human face. Two empty eye sockets, a smile that reached from ear to ear, and skin so pale it was almost transparent. It looked straight at me. I jumped back, my heart pounding. When I regained my composure and looked back, it was gone. The next morning, the police came. They said another neighbor had called because of a strange smell coming from Quinn's house. Benjamin and I looked at each other, shocked as the police broke down the door. What they found inside made me never sleep again. Quinn was dead. His body was found in the living room, dragged across the floor just as I had heard. But the scariest thing? The blonde girl I had seen coming to his house so often, she had died a year ago in a car accident. So, who was standing in front of the window watching me last night? Night had fallen, and the small street was sleeping quietly under the yellow streetlights. I was drifting off to sleep when I heard a scream from across the street. A woman's shrill voice rang out, tearing through the quiet night. I sat up and pulled back the curtains. Before me stood Quinn and a girl in the middle of his driveway, arguing fiercely. I couldn't hear what they were arguing about, but the girl kept throwing her hands up in the air, screaming. Then suddenly, she spat in Quinn's face. Anger flashed in his eyes, but he didn't protest. She jumped into her car, slammed the door, and sped away. Quinn just stood there, shaking her head, and quietly walked back into the house. I told myself that maybe it was just a lover's quarrel, none of my business. But then I noticed that the girl's car had been strangely appearing in front of his house. Not once, not twice, many times, even when Quinn wasn't home. I told Benjamin, my husband, about it, but he just told me not to pry into other people's business. I tried to push the worry away until that fateful night. The sirens blared, rousing me from my sleep. Benjamin and I rushed outside, joining the crowd of neighbors gathered in front of Quinn's house. Police cars and ambulances flashed their red lights, lighting up the street. Then I saw the girl. She was handcuffed by the police, being escorted out of Quinn's house. But what scared me most was the look on her face. Not anger, not panic, just a blank, lifeless stare. Quinn was wheeled out on a stretcher soon after. He was covered in wounds, blood soaking his white shirt. I couldn't believe my eyes. We didn't see Quinn for a week. When he returned, his face was gaunt, his eyes sunken. He invited Benjamin and me into his house and slowly told me what had happened. The girl's name was Ellie. At first, she was sweet, charming, but as Quinn refused her increasingly unreasonable demands, the lavish dinners, the expensive gifts, she became possessive, insane. Quinn had no idea that she had copied his house keys, had no idea that she had been spying on him through his phone, even setting up hidden cameras in his bedroom. Whenever he was away, she would sneak in and change the batteries in the tiny cameras, making sure they were still working. That night, Quinn tried to break up with her, but Ellie saw it all on the cameras. She came to his house in the middle of the night, carrying a knife. Quinn tried to fight back. He struggled, fought her. Blood was all over the floor. The doctor said if Ellie had gone an inch deeper, Quinn would have died. When I heard that, all I could do was shake. Benjamin held my hand tightly, but he couldn't hide his confusion. Quinn sighed, his eyes blank. I learned my lesson. Never flaunt your money, especially to pretty girls. A few days later, he left. Not a word. He said he didn't feel safe anymore, that Ellie had friends like her, and he didn't want them to know where he lived. We never saw Quinn again, and I can only pray that he is still alive. I moved to the new neighborhood hoping for a fresh start, away from the ghosts of the past. I didn't expect much, just a peaceful place to live, and this neighborhood seemed perfect. The houses were quite far apart, the atmosphere was quiet, and there were mostly families with young children. But there was one strange thing: the house right next to me. The building was huge, overwhelming the surrounding houses. At first, I thought it belonged to a large extended family, with grandparents and children living together. But I was wrong. I tried to get to know the neighbors around and also decided to introduce myself to the owner of that house. When I rang the bell, I expected a middle-aged man, perhaps an old man with experienced eyes. But no! The door opened, and a young man appeared. His mullet hair covered most of his forehead. His eyes were so sharp that I felt something was wrong. He looked even younger than me. Wow, I'm surprised someone born in my decade lives here, he said, smiling so widely that I felt uncomfortable. Though I was a little confused, I smiled back. Yeah, I thought this was all about big families. We chatted for a few minutes. He introduced himself as Damon and invited me to come over someday. But when I suggested coming in right now, his smile disappeared. Damon glanced over his shoulder, as if checking on something in the house, then turned back to me, smiling faintly. I wish I could, but I'm busy. I asked him what he did for a living, just to keep the conversation going. He paused, then said simply, "Finance." That answer made me uncomfortable. It was too vague. I asked him if he lived alone, and my jaw almost dropped when he said, "Yes." How could someone like him live alone in such a huge house? I returned home, trying to ignore the strangeness. But then I began to notice. For the next 6 months, Damon almost never left the house. No one came to see him, no noise from the party, no packages delivered, no signs of normal life. His car was always parked right in front of the door, but he never went out. I worked from home. My office was on the 3rd floor, from the window overlooking Damon's land. At first, I didn't pay attention, but as time went on, I noticed more and more unusual things. At night, the lights in his house would flicker strangely, as if something was moving between rooms. Sometimes, I saw a shadow in the 2nd floor window, but it wasn't Damon. The figure was taller, thinner, and stood still in the dark for long periods of time, as if it knew I was looking. One night, while I was working late, I glanced out the window as usual. But this time, I saw something that made my heart stop. Damon was standing right by the 2nd floor window, staring straight at me. He didn't move. He didn't blink. His face, illuminated by the dim light, was so pale and blank it was almost inhuman. I pulled the curtains shut, my heart pounding. My breathing quickened. I told myself that maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe he was just looking out. Not necessarily at me. But then my phone rang. A text from an unknown number. "Why are you staring at my house?" I froze. It was Damon. I didn't answer. I didn't dare. And from that night on, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't the only one watching anymore. On the 4th night, I remember waking up around 2 a.m. At first, I thought I was imagining the sound, or that it was part of a vivid dream I'd just had. But I was wrong. The music was blaring loudly, and when I got out of bed and looked out the window, I saw the strangest sight I'd ever seen. My neighbor Damon had 7 or 8 cars lined up in his driveway. He was clearly having a party. I'm not the type to complain about noise, but it was the middle of the week and the volume was insane. I decided to throw a hoodie and go knock on Damon's door, hoping to get him to turn it down. From the outside, I could see it was a big party. But when I knocked, no one answered. I pulled out my phone to text Damon, but then decided against it. I knew he'd probably ignore me and come up with some lame excuse the next morning. I knocked harder, but still no response. Finally, I reached for the doorknob, and to my horror, it was unlocked. The door opened slowly, revealing a cluttered foyer with at least 10 pairs of shoes. But otherwise, the house was empty. I stepped inside, expecting to find people in the living room or kitchen. But there was no one. Not even a beer bottle or a soda can. But the music, it was still playing. I listened closely and realized something was wrong. It wasn't real music. It was a recording. A tape of laughter, clinking glasses, shouting, all of it simulating a perfect party. But it wasn't real. But what had happened to the shoes? The cars? Was there someone in the house? Despite my fear, I continued walking deeper. And then I saw a cellar door ajar. I couldn't explain it, but something told me that what I was looking for was down there. Down in the basement, it was pitch black, except for a faint light from a small door in the distance. I crept toward it. As I got closer, I began to hear another sound, a mechanical, heavy rhythmic sound, like a chainsaw or some other machine operating. I looked through the crack in the door. There were 3 men standing there. They were much older than Damon. They were wearing overalls, safety glasses, thick rubber gloves. They all stood silently, looking at something just beyond my vision. And then I began to smell the strong smell of bleach. A feeling of dread washed over me. I didn't know what they were looking at, but I knew I shouldn't be here. I turned and ran, trying to be as quiet as possible. But as I reached the stairs, the light behind me suddenly went out. The door was closed. I couldn't hear anything over the fake music, but I felt it. I ran up the stairs, through the living room, and out the front door. I didn't dare run straight home, so I jumped the fence, snuck into my backyard, locked the side door, and gasped for breath. My chest was pounding. From my second-story window, I looked over at Damon's house. No one was chasing me. But a few minutes later, Damon's front door opened, and 8 men came out. They scanned the driveway and the street as if they were looking for someone. But Damon wasn't among them. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but it sounded like they were arguing. One man even pushed another, as if they were about to fight right there in the street. But then, they all went back inside. And then, the music stopped. I didn't know what was going on. I thought about calling the police, but what could I report? That there was a fake party? A creepy basement? Unowned shoes? The next morning, all the cars were gone. Damon was gone. I waited all day, but he never came back. In the days that followed, I tried asking other neighbors if they had heard the noise that night, but no one knew what I was talking about. No one remembered the party I had witnessed, and Damon still hadn't come back. His house was slowly becoming an abandoned house. The grass was overgrown. Packages were piled up in front of the door, unclaimed. No sign of him still being around. Should I go find out? Or should I forget it all? pretend it never happened because I had a feeling that if I searched for answers, I might never come back.